The Galactic Federation had ruled the galaxy for centuries, a coalition of advanced species with technology far beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. It was a peaceful, stable order, or so they believed. The Federation's leaders, composed of the most powerful alien races, prided themselves on maintaining control over the galaxy's volatile species. They considered themselves the stewards of peace, holding an iron grip on countless worlds, policing those who dared to challenge the status quo. In their eyes, humanity was a recent addition to this order, primitive, disorganized, and destined to remain in the shadows of more evolved races. Humanity had been allowed into the Federation due to its raw potential, but only as a subordinate. Their technology, still in its early stages compared to galactic standards, had not impressed the Federation's leaders. The humans' history of violence, war, and internal strife had earned them little respect. To the Federation, the human race was just another collection of weak, chaotic beings, a species that had stumbled through history without true unity or purpose. They had no great technological advancements, no ancient powers, and no place at the top of the galactic food chain. The Federation leaders dismissed the human race as a curiosity, a species that would eventually fall in line and benefit from the larger empire's guidance. To them, humanity's sole contribution to the galaxy was its numbers and its ability to act as cannon fodder when the time came. They were useful in wars, their soldiers expendable, their resources ripe for exploitation. To make sure humans remained in their place, the Federation imposed a strict set of regulations on them. The Federation gave humanity just enough freedom to function but controlled everything else. Human leadership was allowed to exist, but only within boundaries established by the Federation. Diplomacy was restricted, and every human action was scrutinized. Any sign of rebellion was swiftly crushed. This atmosphere of oppression hung heavy over human society. Still, the humans endured. They had learned to accept their role, even though there were whispers of resentment. But those whispers were easily dismissed by the Federation. What could humanity do? After all, they were still so young compared to the other galactic races. They had no ancient warriors, no empires stretching back millennia. They were simply a race of settlers, slowly growing into their own, a far cry from the other, more civilized species of the galaxy. The Federation's leaders, comfortable in their positions of power, had little regard for humanity's potential. They didn't see the fire within them, the unpredictable and uncontrollable strength that had propelled them through millennia of conflict. The Federation never acknowledged that, deep in the hearts of every human, lay the genes of an ancient warrior class, warriors who had fought through impossible odds, rising from the ashes of their own destruction to achieve victory. These warriors, once thought to be myth, were known as the Berserkers. Humans had legends of them, warriors so fierce that they seemed to defy the laws of nature, rising from the carnage of battle with no regard for their own survival. They were born for war, driven by an animalistic rage that made them impervious to pain, fear, and even death. But those were just stories to the Federation. The Berserkers were no more than myths, as far as the Federation was concerned. At the heart of the Federation's arrogance lay a massive misunderstanding of humanity. They saw humans as volatile, emotional beings, prone to outbursts and rash decisions. They saw their history of wars and violence as proof that humans were unworthy of respect. In the Federation's eyes, humans were like children who needed constant guidance, tamed and controlled by the Empire's superior wisdom. There was no sense in believing that humanity could ever be a real threat. But that would change soon. The first seeds of change came when the Federation's demands on humanity escalated. The leaders of the Federation, growing more confident in their control, decided that it was time for humanity to contribute more. It was no longer enough for them to be a passive part of the Federation. The Federation needed them to provide more resources, more soldiers, more assets for their never-ending conflicts. The demands on humanity's labor force, military, and supplies became unbearable. Human leaders were given little choice but to comply. It was during one of these high-stakes negotiations that the spark that would ignite the Berserker rage was lit. The human delegation, led by Captain Alexei Harper, was summoned to a meeting with the Federation's High Council. It was a routine meeting, at first, discussing the allocation of human resources for yet another galactic war. But it quickly took a turn for the worse. The Federation's representative, an alien of considerable psychic abilities and political influence, treated the humans with open disdain. The Federation official, with his sharp intellect and control over human affairs, believed that it was his right to humiliate anyone who stood in his way. He mocked the humans' abilities, their technology, and their very existence as a race. In front of the council, he belittled Captain Harper, calling them nothing more than the last vestiges of a barbaric species. He sneered at their weak military and the outdated technologies they still relied on. The Federation leader, with a smirk on his face, spat words that would ignite the dormant fire within humanity. "You're nothing more than children playing at war," he said, his voice dripping with superiority. "The galaxy is not a playground for your fantasies. You will learn your place, or you will be wiped out just like the others." The insult wasn't just about their military or technology. It was a personal attack on everything humanity had endured. It struck at their pride, at their culture, and at their deepest held beliefs about who they were. Captain Alexei Harper, a soldier hardened by years of conflict, stood there in stunned silence for a moment. His hands balled into fists, his teeth gritted, but he said nothing. The humiliation was too great. He had always accepted his role, his place in the galaxy's great machine, but something in him snapped. This moment, this final insult, was too much. The Federation leader's words resonated like a slap to the face, cutting through the years of tension that had built up in Captain Harper. Something in him stirred, something that had been dormant for centuries. That dormant rage, that primal, Berserker rage, began to awaken. No one understood what was happening at first, not even Alexei. The rage built and built within him, far beyond anything he had ever experienced before. The anger he had suppressed for years, for decades, came crashing to the surface with an intensity that overwhelmed him. His vision blurred, his body trembling with power, as his mind entered a state of pure fury. It was as if his entire being had been consumed by the fires of battle. A warrior's instinct took over, an ancient force from deep within humanity's past. In an instant, Captain Harper was no longer the diplomat, the negotiator. He was a force of nature, a weapon that had been dormant for too long. The Federation leader, the one who had humiliated him, was suddenly aware that his words had triggered something far greater than he had ever imagined. The Federation, in all their arrogance, had awoken something they could not control. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. Captain Alexei Harper was no longer just a human. He was something much more dangerous. He was a Berserker. The Federation had no way of understanding the true power they had unleashed. When Captain Alexei Harper's rage erupted, it was not just a physical transformation, it was a psychological one as well. The Berserker state wasn't something that could be easily contained or even comprehended. To the Federation, it was a force beyond logic or reason. They had no concept of what this was, what a human could become when pushed too far. They had believed themselves invincible, with their advanced technology, psychic abilities, and vast knowledge. But in that instant, they realized that humanity's potential was something they could neither control nor predict. Harper's transformation was swift. In a matter of minutes, the calm, composed diplomat who had once stood in the Federation Council chamber had vanished. Instead, there was only a human driven by pure, unrelenting fury, a Berserker whose rage flowed like a river through his every vein. The human body had become something more than flesh and bone. It was a vessel for destruction, powered by sheer, primal emotion. And that rage would not be sated by the simple insults of a Federation leader. It would not stop until the galaxy knew what humans were capable of when their anger was unleashed. The Federation scrambled to contain the situation. At first, they tried to dismiss the event as a fluke, something that could be chalked up to an isolated outburst. They sent in their most powerful diplomats and psychics to de-escalate the situation, believing that they could reason with Captain Harper, that they could use their advanced knowledge of the mind to subdue him. But they quickly realized they had made a grave miscalculation. No amount of psychic manipulation or peaceful negotiation could reach Harper while he was in this state. The Berserker rage had consumed him, turning his thoughts into a singular obsession: destruction. The Federation's leaders had no idea what to do. They had sent fleets of ships to bring Harper down, using their most sophisticated weapons to try and neutralize him. But every attack they launched seemed to bounce off him as if he were made of something otherworldly. His body, hardened by the fury within him, shrugged off their weaponry. Nothing seemed to slow him down, nothing seemed to penetrate the armor of pure rage that enveloped him. As Harper tore through Federation forces, he left behind nothing but destruction. Each planet he ravaged was a testament to his fury, each fleet he obliterated a warning to those who thought humans could be treated as expendable. The galaxy had underestimated the power of human will, the power of a species that could tap into a deep, ancient strength when pushed to the edge. The Berserker was not just a warrior, he was an embodiment of humanity's ability to survive and fight back, no matter the odds. The Federation tried to organize a counteroffensive. They sent in their elite forces, their best soldiers, their most advanced technology, but nothing worked. These were beings who had lived for centuries, perfected in the art of war and peace, but they were powerless against the rage of a single human. Harper fought with a relentlessness that no alien species had ever seen. He tore apart entire battalions with his bare hands, obliterated ships with nothing more than sheer will. And all the while, his rage continued to grow. The more the Federation tried to stop him, the more they fueled his fury. Word spread quickly across the galaxy. News of a human destroying entire fleets and taking down galactic empires reached even the most distant corners of Federation-controlled space. The galaxy had always thought of humans as weak, as a species unworthy of any real power. But now, that perception was being shattered. The Federation had awakened a force they couldn't control, a power that threatened to undo everything they had built. They realized that the primitive humans had more to offer than they had ever imagined. And that realization terrified them. The Federation's leaders began to panic. They sent more ships, more soldiers, more of their most powerful commanders to hunt down Harper, but the human was always one step ahead. His rage was not just a physical weapon, it was psychological as well. The mere idea that humanity had the power to turn the tide against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia sent shockwaves through the Federation's leadership. They could no longer pretend that humans were simply a weak, disorganized race. The Berserker's rampage was a reminder that there was more to humanity than met the eye. They were a species that had survived countless trials, from natural disasters to war to oppression. They had learned to adapt, to fight, to survive. And now, they had a warrior who could represent that unyielding spirit on the battlefield. As the destruction spread, the Federation began to fear for its very existence. The fact that one human could cause this much chaos, destroying entire fleets, toppling powerful leaders, and leaving nothing but devastation in his wake, shook the foundations of the Federation. They had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the price. The Federation, once confident in its position of power, was suddenly unsure of its future. Was the galaxy truly as invincible as they had thought, or had they overlooked something far more dangerous? Harper's rampage was more than just a physical manifestation of fury. It was a warning, a message to the galaxy that humans would not be underestimated, that their strength was not to be taken lightly. The Berserker was a symbol of humanity's potential, a reminder that beneath the surface of every human lay the strength to overcome, the rage to destroy, and the will to survive. As the Federation's most powerful forces crumbled before him, the leaders began to realize that their control over the galaxy was not as absolute as they had once believed. The tide was turning, and they had no idea how to stop it. The human Berserker had shown them just how fragile their empire truly was. And now, there was only one question left. Would humanity rise as a new power in the galaxy, or would the Federation finally succeed in quelling the rage they had so foolishly awakened? Captain Alexei Harper, once a mere diplomat, had become a living symbol of the chaos that could be unleashed when humanity was pushed too far. He had become a force of nature, an unstoppable warrior who had awakened something deep within the human spirit, A rage that was now a weapon, more potent and terrifying than any technology the Federation could bring to bear. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. Now they would learn the cost of that mistake. The Federation's efforts to quell Captain Alexei Harper's rampage became increasingly desperate. The damage he caused was monumental, and the shockwaves from his actions rippled across the galaxy. Entire fleets were wiped out in moments. Advanced warships, thought to be invincible, fell under the might of a single human warrior, with no understanding of the source of his power or how to stop it. What had once been the most powerful empire in the galaxy was suddenly on the back foot, struggling to contain the destructive force they had inadvertently unleashed. With every new offensive, the Federation's forces were met with failure. They sent their best soldiers, their most advanced technologies, and their deadliest commanders to confront Harper, but he shattered them with brutal efficiency. It wasn't just that his physical prowess was unmatched. His rage was a force that overwhelmed the Federation's most elite forces, rendering them ineffective. They tried to isolate him, corner him, or capture him, but Harper's rampage seemed unstoppable. No matter how many ships the Federation sent, how many troops they deployed, the Berserker remained an untouchable juggernaut, a nightmare from which there was no escape. The Federation's military leaders convened to strategize a new approach, but each plan they devised was thwarted before it could even begin. They realized that this wasn't a normal war. They weren't fighting an army, they were fighting an embodiment of humanity's rage. The more they threw at Harper, the more he seemed to grow in power, feeding off the conflict he was creating. It was as though the very concept of war had been woven into his DNA, as if his entire existence had been primed for this moment, this cataclysmic event that would reshape the galaxy. The Federation could see now that the human race was not only resilient, it was capable of transcending the limitations of even the most advanced alien species. To the Federation's dismay, the very idea of a human rising to challenge them in this way was unthinkable. They had never seen anything like it before. The Federation soldiers, trained in the arts of war and combat, could not comprehend the savage strength that flowed through Harper's veins. They were used to enemies that could be reasoned with, subdued, or simply outgunned. But Harper was a human, and there was no understanding of what drove him, no way to predict how he would react. All their efforts to strategize were pointless. He was a force of nature that could not be contained. As Harper moved from one world to another, destroying everything in his path, the Federation began to feel the full weight of what had been unleashed. This wasn't just a rebellion, this was an existential threat to their entire empire. The ripple effect of Harper's actions began to spread, and soon, other species in the Federation began to question their loyalty. There were whispers of revolt, murmurs of rebellion. If one human could cause this much damage, how many more were there waiting to rise? The very fabric of the Federation's control was unraveling before their eyes. Despite the horror they felt at Harper's rampage, some in the Federation still refused to acknowledge the true source of the problem. The more arrogant leaders among them continued to view humanity as a nuisance, something to be crushed and controlled. They failed to see the bigger picture, the sheer scale of the power they had awakened. They believed that they could snuff out Harper's fire with the right show of force, that they could intimidate him back into submission. But the deeper they dug, the more they discovered that the Berserker's rage was not just a response to his personal humiliation. It was something deeply embedded in humanity's nature, a rage that could no longer be suppressed, no matter how hard they tried. The Federation's leaders, facing the ever-growing threat of human rebellion, turned to their most powerful weapon, fear. They issued orders to wipe out entire human colonies, to make an example of those who dared to resist them. The hope was that by striking down human civilians, they could extinguish the fire of rebellion before it spread any further. But what they failed to understand was that the more the Federation hurt humanity, the more they fueled the anger that was driving the Berserker. Each innocent life lost, each cruel act committed by the Federation, made Harper stronger. He was no longer just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for every human who had ever been oppressed, every human who had ever been dismissed, every human who had ever been pushed to the edge. As Harper continued his warpath through Federation space, the galaxy watched in awe. Even the alien species that had once looked down on humanity now saw a different side of them. They saw the fire in humanity's eyes, the raw, untamed spirit that had allowed them to survive for centuries despite overwhelming odds. They saw that humans were not simply a race of weaklings and cowards, as the Federation had always claimed. They were a species that, when pushed too far, would rise up and become something far more terrifying. Harper's rampage became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of the deep, untapped power within humanity, a power that was impossible to predict or control. The Federation, terrified of the full potential of the humans they had oppressed for so long, began to fracture. Some leaders called for the immediate cessation of hostilities, suggesting that humanity's fury could be harnessed, that peace could still be achieved if they simply offered humanity the respect they deserved. Others, however, insisted on an all-out war, hoping that they could destroy humanity before it could fully awaken to its potential. But by this point, the damage had already been done. Humanity had tasted the power of its own rage, and there was no going back. In a final, desperate bid to contain this situation, the Federation gathered its most powerful warlords and sent them after Harper. These were beings who had fought in countless wars, defeated innumerable enemies, and conquered entire civilizations. They were the best the Federation had to offer, and they were tasked with bringing down a single human. But even these commanders, each armed with the Federation's most advanced technology, could not stand against Harper. One by one, they fell before him. Their armies, once thought to be unstoppable, crumbled at the hands of a berserker who refused to be tamed. As Harper continued his rampage, the Federation's grip on the galaxy weakened. The once great empire began to collapse under the weight of its own hubris, its leaders no longer certain of their own power. They had awakened a force they could not control, and now they faced the consequences. Harper, though he was just one human, had become the symbol of humanity's defiance, a defiance that could not be crushed, no matter how much force the Federation applied. And with every victory, Harper's legend grew, becoming a beacon for those who had been oppressed by the Federation for so long. The Federation, in its arrogance, had underestimated humanity. And now, they were learning that some forces, once awakened, could never be put back to sleep. Harper was not just a man. He was the embodiment of humanity's rage, and nothing would stop him until the Federation had paid for its crimes. The galaxy would never be the same again. As Captain Alexei Harper continued his rampage across Federation space, the galaxy was forced to reckon with the truth. Humanity was a force they could not control, nor could they ever hope to understand. The Federation's initial misjudgment of humans had led to their worst nightmare, an unstoppable berserker whose rage had ignited a chain reaction that they could no longer halt. As their empire crumbled under the weight of Harper's fury, the Federation's leadership was divided on how to address the growing crisis. Some still clung to their belief that humanity was nothing more than a temporary threat, a fire that could eventually be extinguished. Others, however, were beginning to understand the true nature of the humans they had oppressed for centuries, a species with untold potential, capable of rising up when pushed too far. The Federation's attempts to suppress Harper only served to further inflame his rage. Each battle he fought, each alien army he shattered, became a symbol of humanity's defiance. The more the Federation tried to crush him, the more he fought back. His assault on their strongholds was relentless, and soon the Federation's most powerful leaders were forced to acknowledge that this was not a mere rebellion. Harper wasn't just fighting for his own survival, he was fighting for every human who had been mistreated, every human who had been underestimated, every human who had been dismissed as weak or inferior. In their desperation, the Federation's most senior leaders turned to their last, most dangerous weapon, fear. They broadcasted their ultimatum across all Federation-controlled space. They called for the destruction of every human colony in an effort to extinguish the last ember of rebellion. Their hope was that by eradicating human life from the galaxy, they would quell the rage that had been unleashed. But this only backfired. The more they targeted human colonies, the more the Berserker's fury grew. Each act of genocide, each massacre committed by the Federation, became a rallying cry for all humans. Harper's rampage was no longer just about revenge, it was about justice. His every step was a retribution for the countless lives lost under the Federation's rule. As the Federation's most advanced fleets moved in to strike at Harper, their commanders were faced with a new, horrifying reality. They had no way of countering the fury that Harper brought to every confrontation. Their most powerful warships, once invulnerable, were now nothing more than targets for a human capable of destroying entire fleets with nothing but raw power. There were no more strategies to be devised, no more plans to be made. The Federation's military was simply outclassed, outmatched by a single human. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the Federation's once glorious empire began to collapse. Alien species that had long been subjugated by the Federation began to see humanity in a new light. They saw the strength of a species that had endured oppression, war, and persecution for centuries, and now they saw that strength unleashed. The tide began to turn, and once subjugated civilizations began to rise up against their former oppressors, emboldened by the example set by Captain Harper. It was not just Harper who was rising up, it was humanity itself. The Federation had believed that by keeping humanity subjugated, they could maintain their dominance over the galaxy. But what they hadn't counted on was the tenacity, the defiance, and the rage that ran deep within humanity's veins. Now, the galaxy was being forced to reckon with the power of the human spirit, a force that could not be bound by any empire, no matter how vast or advanced. The Federation, realizing the gravity of their mistake, finally attempted to open negotiations with Harper, but it was too late. By this point, the Federation's control over their empire had deteriorated so much that any offer of peace seemed hollow and meaningless. Their attempts to placate Harper and offer him concessions only fueled his rage. Harper had become a symbol of everything that humanity had suffered under the Federation's rule, and no amount of diplomacy or empty promises could undo the damage they had done. As the conflict escalated, the Federation's leaders began to make one final, desperate move. They assembled their remaining fleets and commanders, hoping that they could mount a final offensive to crush Harper and bring the war to an end. This last-ditch effort was met with the same fate as all their previous attempts. Harper, now fully consumed by the Berserker rage, tore through the Federation's remaining forces with brutal efficiency. It wasn't just his strength that was formidable. It was his ability to survive, to adapt, and to fight with a fury that no alien race could match. In the final stages of the conflict, the Federation's leadership was brought to its knees. Their empire had crumbled, their fleets had been destroyed, and their most powerful leaders were either dead or in hiding. The galaxy, once under the tight control of the Federation, had been transformed. The human race had not only survived, it had risen to challenge the galaxy itself. No longer would humanity be viewed as weak or primitive. No longer would they be dismissed as a species to be controlled. The Federation had awakened something in humanity that they could never put back to sleep. Captain Alexei Harper, though still consumed by the rage that had fueled his rampage, had become more than just a berserker. He had become the embodiment of humanity's defiance. He was a symbol of everything that had been wronged, every injustice that had been perpetrated against his people, and every human who had ever been told they were too weak to matter. The galaxy had learned a powerful lesson: when you push humanity too far, you awaken something that cannot be controlled. And now, as the Federation lay broken and its empire shattered, humanity stood at the crossroads of a new era. The galaxy would never forget the lesson of the Berserker, and humanity's place in the stars had forever been secured. The Federation had tried to crush them, but in the end, it was humanity that had proven to be the true force of nature. The rage of one human had sparked a revolution, and in that revolution, humanity had found its true strength. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Federation's dominance had been shattered, and humanity had risen, not as a weak, primitive species, but as a power to be reckoned with. The Federation's leaders had ignored human rage. Now they would know the true cost of that mistake.